Now, many of you may have heard about the hollow earth theory, which is that basically there is a large hole either at the top of our North Pole or both poles. But mainly what's been talked about is a giant opening at the North Pole that is said to lead into the inner Earth, where there is land, there is an inner sun, supposedly.
In my research, I have discovered maps that show a lot of these deep underground bases, or also known as DUMBs. These bases are in locations where there appear to have been other openings deep under the earth. We have access to the ground-penetrating radar data. This data shows specific types of caverns and openings deep, deep beneath the earth, sometimes a mile deep. When you look at some of these overlaying military tunnels, it seems as if they knew where they were at, so they actually tunneled to these ancient locations and kind of made them into their path as they created their own grid.
The hollow earth theory has been around for several years. The original goes back maybe 500 years, and various very well-known historical figures have talked about this. Sir Isaac Newton was the proponent for the hollow earth.
The famous mathematical genius of the 18th century, Leonhard Euler, concluded that the earth was hollow, containing a central sun. And Dr. Edmund Halley, who discovered the Halley Comet and was a royal astronomer of England, also believed that the earth was hollow on the inside. The Nazi connection, and that there was a map from the Third Reich which showed several secret passages depicted, which were used by German U-boats to access these mysterious underground regions. And then there was the case of Carl Unger, who was a crew member aboard a German U-boat, who wrote letters stating that the crew had reached the interior of the earth and that they did not consider coming back.
That South American tradition, which is very interesting, of the tribe that said that they were guarding the entrance to the inner earth. And they said it would take maybe a couple of weeks to finally get down far enough where they would meet the inhabitants, and they were just these gigantic people, anywhere between 10 and 11.5 feet tall. So, of course, the common idea is that, oh, this is just a bunch of mythology by a primitive people. But what's interesting is they talked about how when they got far enough down, one of the things they saw was basically molten rock. And that's exactly what modern science tells us you should find underneath the earth. And how would a primitive people know that? There are also areas where there's all this lush plants and food and the people living down there. Can we take that seriously? We're left with this very interesting myth that has a few intriguing elements to it.
Google Earth maps showing obvious photoshopping and blurring, where you will have high-resolution images of the rest of the continent, but when it comes to the direct center of Antarctica, you have nothing but blurred white nothingness. Now, if you remember, we've spoken about Admiral Richard Byrd in the past when we were speaking about how he took a Navy fleet down to Antarctica and was attacked by these flying saucers that burst out of the ocean and literally wiped out half of his fleet. So when you leave this video, Google Admiral Richard E. Byrd to hear more about that. However, Admiral Byrd also, who was, by the way, a very distinguished, well-known, well-respected pioneer, aviator, and polar explorer, flew over the North Pole in May of 1926 and led numerous expeditions to Antarctica, including a flight over the South Pole on November 29, 1929. So basically, through one of Mr. Byrd's diaries, it was found that he had written about a gaping hole over the North Pole and that he had actually entered inner Earth. In his diary, along with other witnesses, he tells of entering this hollow interior of the Earth, traveling 1,700 miles over mountains, lakes, vegetation, animal life, and that he saw, quote, monstrous animals resembling the mammoth of antiquity moving through the underbrush, and that he eventually found cities with a thriving civilization. Now, Admiral Byrd also stated that the inner Earth has an inner sun, and that his theory was that the poles of Earth are convex rather than concave, and that ships and planes can actually fly or drive right in.
The Mahoxie Indians of Guyana and also of the northern Amazon basin have a very interesting legend concerning an entrance to the inner earth. And according to their legend, there is an entrance to the underworld there. And at one point, they were in charge of security over the entrance to this location. And according to their legend, they could descend into this world and come into contact with the very tall men who were basically giants, 15 feet tall, 12 feet tall. And they had been given this task of guarding this location and the entrance and not letting anyone else enter.
Traveling for 15 days down into this cavern until they literally put down their torches, because there's these inner balls of light that will light you the rest of the way on steps that are 33 inches long. Eventually making it into caverns where food was growing, lit by 4 large sun-like discs that they couldn't even stare at, they were so bright. And they describe the food as being apples the size of a human head, grapes the size of a human fist, interacting with giant beings that they described as being 3 to 4 meters in height, who would catch giant fish for them and give it to them as a gift. That kind of detail, coming from a culture who didn't have any access to libraries, didn't have any access to television, satellite, internet. How is it that they come across or begin to tell stories that are being duplicated in all these other cultures? There has to be some truth to it. Now, whether it's completely hollow inside or whether or not these vast caverns are just there, I believe that they're there. And a lot of people believe that they're inhabited by what we would describe as being an alien species, an ultra-terrestrial species. There's a lot of scientists today, planetary scientists, credible planetary scientists, that will tell you that when a planet evolves, when it comes into being, it has to do so in such a way that the center is hollow. Now, whether or not the Earth itself is completely hollowed out inside, or whether or not they are just vast inner caverns that might be the size of whole continents. In ancient civilization, they have these hollow Earth stories.
It's not just the Earth that is said to have these holes, but every planet in the solar system, from Mars to Saturn. Here's an interesting image of the North Pole of Saturn, which shows this vortex surrounding a massive hole that's near the size of the Earth at the top of Saturn. And we've spoken before about planets and moons around the solar system that show characteristics of being hollow. We've talked about the moon being hollow. But an interesting thing to note, as you're seeing in these images here, is the United States government does not allow planes to fly over the poles. In all of these flight radar maps that you're seeing here, you will notice this massive circular hole that no plane has ever been allowed to cross over. All flights are directed to go around the poles. And any airline pilot flying into these areas will tell you this.
I want to imagine what is below us, what the earth has to teach us. It is a living thing, and our lives are tied to it. So we don't have to be adherents of the ancient nature religions to know this is important stuff. But the stories can help us, that perhaps there is some kind of personality that we're in a relationship with. Some god, some goddess more likely, since the earth is maternal, it feeds us, that we need to be respectful of and to seek a deeper relationship with.